Welcome to Murder with the Missus. I'm Darren.
And I'm Amy, and today we're going to tell you about the Harrison family.
Don't forget to smash that like button and go and check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, and Facebook. Like, share, subscribe, and don't forget to tell your friends. And if you guys want to contribute to the pod, we do have a Cash App. It's $Murder WTM.
Yep. We're back in Canada, Mississauga. And this is just one of those cases that when I found out about it, it stuck out. So I wanted to tell you about it. It's the case of Bill, Bridget, and Caleb Harrison. They lived in a big 2-story, 6-bedroom house, a house where they hosted holidays and events for their families, a nice place where everyone could gather and be comfortable. The weird part is that in 2009, Bill would die in that house. A year later, in 2010, Bridget would die in that house. And then in 2013, Caleb would die in that house. Every family member who lived there died there in a span of 4 years.
This is like Brittany Murphy.
Sounds like it, but not quite. Bill was found in the bathroom, Bridget at the foot of the stairs, and Caleb in his bed. All died under different circumstances, all suspicious. Well, to some, they were all suspicious. And that's what caught my attention. And here's what I found out. Back in the 60s, Bridget was an actress in the theater. Bill worked in the costume department of a performing arts center. So this is how they met. And they married in 1969. Bill started working in management while Bridget became a teacher, getting to the point in her career where she worked with Ontario's Minister of Education. And they had been described as warm and generous. They did find out that they wouldn't be able to have kids naturally. So in 1973, they adopted Caleb when he was just 6 months old. And Caleb was a pistol. So he and Bridget went round and round as he grew up, with Bill being described as the calm one.
Sounds like Caleb and Bridget were too much alike.
It sounds like it, right? That could be the case. Caleb grew up and was described by friends and family as being witty and fun to be around. So he sounds like maybe a little combination of his parents' personalities. In 2000, 27-year-old Caleb was working in a shipping and receiving warehouse, and behind the desk was 19-year-old Melissa Merritt. They fell in love and were married within a year. All was good. They had a son and a daughter, and they moved about an hour away from Bill and Bridget in Georgetown, so they were heavily involved with the grandkids. But as it happens sometimes, Melissa and Caleb's relationship went downhill. Caleb drank too much. Money was always tight, and they were fighting a lot. In June of 2005, Melissa called the cops saying that Caleb had put her in a headlock and hit her in the head repeatedly. Caleb, of course, said he only acted in self-defense. Needless to say, they split up after this altercation. Caleb was arrested for domestic assault, and they started the divorce process. Melissa started keeping the kids from the Harrisons.
The divorce sounds like it was a good idea.
Yes, a very good idea. And it was in October of 2005 when Melissa met Christopher Fattore. He was a bouncer, a handyman, and sometimes a Hooters manager. And they would have a ceremony a year later, but she didn't actually finalize her divorce from Caleb yet, so her marriage to Chris was not legal. But he is referred to as her common law husband. And together, they went on to have 4 more kids.
Now there's 6 kids.
Yeah.
Damn.
Lots of kids.
Man, I'll tell you what, dude, like even your dad, you know, he had how many
There
brothers?
was 8 of them. Mm-hmm.
8 of them. Good Lord.
And my mom had 6.
Yeah, your mom had 6. Man,
Big families.
big families.
Lots of kids.
Yeah. I was grateful just for the brother and sister I had, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd want much more than that.
Can you imagine?
I
Wow.
mean, you know, it's just, that's enough.
That's enough. That's
And
plenty.
I'm not saying that's bad. I mean, that's all I wanted.
Right.
That's all a person needed,
Right.
you know?
But big families, I
Yeah.
mean, you've always got somebody to have your back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's always good. Now, Caleb did get a suspended sentence in the domestic case, so he was not allowed to drink. It was about a month later that he would go to a keg party. But he was a designated driver, and he drove a couple of people around. He was behaving. Until he wasn't. Temptation is a bitch. He did end up drinking. A lot. He tried to drive some friends, but they were refusing to get into the car with him, and they were trying to talk him out of driving too. But he didn't listen, and he drove himself home. Almost. While going about 62 miles per hour, He crossed the center line and hit a cab head on. The cab had 4 passengers at the time. Many suffered broken bones and other injuries, but sadly, the cab driver would pass away the next day. Caleb was charged with 3 counts of impaired driving causing harm and 1 count of impaired driving causing death. He was reportedly 2.5 times over the limit. He was allowed to bail out with the stipulation that he remained living with Bill and Bridget. And since he was already under supervision, they allowed him to have the kids a couple of days a week and every other weekend too. And this was around the time that Melissa reported a home invasion. Someone had broken into her house and she had a physical altercation with them in the backyard before they ran away. And she told the cops that that was Caleb. But when the cops went to talk to Caleb, they saw that he had a broken leg and it was in a cast and he was on crutches. So it'd be kind of hard for him to, 1, break into the house and 2, physically go toe to toe with somebody in the backyard. And she made several more reports to the point where the cops were convinced that she was just making it up.
Even the cops knew that this was bullshit.
Exactly. And someone started an online petition to get signatures to take to the judge in Caleb's case, demanding he get sentenced to a minimum of 5 years in prison for the drunk driving accident. But it didn't hit goal. And in January of 2009, Caleb's friends and families testified to his character in court, saying he was a good guy. He had just been going through hard times and struggling with alcohol. He would be sentenced to 18 months in prison with 2 years probation, and his license was suspended for that 2 years as well. We would find out later that it was Chris who's the one who started that online petition. He and Melissa also went to his trial and made faces at the family behind their backs, even drove past them outside the courthouse, sticking their tongues out at them.
I mean, so there was really 8 kids at the house. I mean,
Right.
Really, what are you, fucking 2 years old?
Exactly. This is a drunk driving case where somebody died, and you're in court like, nah.
Sitting out there with your tongue out, and fucking moose
With
knuckle, with your moose fingers
I'm
out
sorry.
and everything. With your moose fingers out and everything, making antlers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just their maturity level, it makes them children. They're toddlers,
I mean, they're acting like fucking toddlers.
but they're grown-ass people. And Bridget had got to the point where she was keeping a diary of all the stupid altercations that they'd had with Melissa, noting all the bullshit, and even the way she talked to Caleb in front of the kids. After one argument, Chris told Caleb, "You'll burn in hell for the lies you told." And Melissa had made 5 unsubstantiated claims that the Harrisons had physically abused the kids. But not only did the cops find no evidence of that, they found out that Melissa had been coaching the kids on what to say. And this brings us to April 16th of 2009. Bridget worked late and she didn't get home until about 9 p.m. The house is dark, which was odd to her. The TV in the living room was on, and there was some partially eaten food on the coffee table. She went upstairs looking for Bill, but couldn't find him. On her way down the stairs, she sees the light on under the bathroom door that's next to the stairs. She doesn't get an answer at the door, so she picked the lock and finds Bill on the bathroom floor. She called paramedics and they called the coroner. The coroner saw faint bruising on Bill's forehead and nose, and there was a bruise on the front of his scalp. He also had a fractured sternum, and they attribute all this to him falling and hitting the sink. He had a couple of thin red lines on his throat, but they say that that could have been caused by his gold chain that he was wearing. They list his cause of death as natural, acute cardiac arrhythmia, and this doesn't make sense to Bridget. Bill exercised daily, ate healthy, and they didn't actually find anything wrong with his heart. They said it just stopped.
I mean, that can happen, but why was he eating dinner in the dark?
That's also a question that Bridget had. Why
I
is he
mean-
eating in the dark?
I mean, I had a buddy, you know, me and my brother was talking about this the other day. We had a friend that was, I think he was like 37 years old, healthy and everything, you know, in the lowrider scene and stuff like that. And he was under his truck working and he was just stressed
Yeah.
and had a heart attack, died
Yeah.
right there underneath his truck. I mean, it was the damnedest thing.
It happens. But there was other things like him eating in the dark when he knows Bridget's on her way home.
Yeah.
Why did he lock the bathroom door if he was home alone? But these aren't suspicious enough to show any foul play. So they just chalk it up to natural and move on with their business. And this was only about a month after Caleb went to prison. So he was given a day pass to come home and grieve with the family. Now, the day after Bill died, Bridget went to the kids' school to check on them and just to see them, really. You want to be close to family when something like this happens. When Caleb went to jail, his half of the custody transferred to Bill and Bridget, much to Melissa's disgust. But, so she still had a big hand and played a big part in the kids' lives. But the kids weren't at school. Chris had signed them out the day before at 1 p.m. And in case you're keeping a timeline, that's 8 hours before Bridget got home and found Bill dead. But they didn't get the kids out of school before one of the boys told his class that his mom said they were going on a secret trip. Bridget went to their apartment, but no one was home. So she called the cops. Melissa did email her a few days later saying that she ran away with her family because she had been getting threatening letters from an unknown person. And she had also mailed a similar letter to Caleb in prison that was postmarked the day after Bill's death.
This is really suspicious. The timing, it's just fishy.
It's hinky, as you like to say.
Yeah.
And if Melissa and Chris were pissed about the custody arrangements, they were about to get really pissed. But because of this stunt, sole temporary custody was granted to Bridget. Bridget hired a private investigator to help find the kids. In November, so 7 months after they disappeared, an order was finally granted to look at Melissa's bank records.
They sure took their sweet time.
Yeah, 7 months after the kids come, they're like, okay, well, let's see where they're making their purchases.
Yeah.
Maybe you should have done that the day of, but whatever. And they were able to see a recent charge on her card in Nova Scotia.
Oh, over there at Oak Island. Digging for gold.
Maybe that's what they were doing. So they tracked them down and found them. They had dyed the kids' hair a different color, and they were going by different names. Melissa was charged with parental child abduction and given 18 months probation. Caleb had been released for good behavior in June, so he was back staying at his mom's house and now with the kids.
Here's a little tidbit.
Do it.
Nova Scotia is New Scotland.
New Scotland. Hey, yo.
Let you know.
See, we learn new things every day.
Everybody does.
On April 21st of 2010, Caleb's 8-year-old son came home after school to find Bridget's body laying at the foot of the stairs. Her head and one arm was still on the stairs. She had her shoes on, and her wallet and glasses were found next to her, so they assumed that she was rushing to leave and accidentally fell down the stairs. But while she had injuries consistent with a fall, like fractures to her neck, hip, pelvis, and wrist, she also had bruising on her jaw, injuries to the front of the neck, petechiae, and fractures to her larynx. So it was ruled as a suspicious death.
Damage to the front of her neck is a red flag.
That's a red flag. You don't fall down the stairs with your head extended like that.
Yeah.
So they're like, no. So they looked at Caleb. I mean, now he inherits everything. So he has the most to gain. He also hadn't been out of jail for long. He and Bridget were known to butt heads his whole life, and he had pretty calm demeanor when he was questioned in her death. Not like he had just lost his last living parent so tragically. But Bridget had dropped him off at work that morning, and he had not left until he got the call about Bridget being found. So his alibi was good. So they asked him who he thinks could have done this. And he said, I'd find out where Melissa and Chris were. Seems that Bridget died on April 21st, and the next day was supposed to be a hearing in the abduction case where Bridget was supposed to speak in court. So they pull Melissa in and talk to her, and Christopher too. Chris said he worked in the backyard some that day and ran some errands. He was seen on surveillance from different places around town, so they're like, okay, that makes sense. Melissa had been trying to run a home daycare, so she had been home all day babysitting. But she was happy to tell the police about the old domestic violence case of Caleb's. She said he was sneaky, that he didn't attack her face to face, and he would wait for her to turn her back. Sounds like she was trying to make it sound like he snuck up behind Bridget and maybe pushed her. That's speculation. She also talks about Bridget dying around the 1-year anniversary of Bill's death, saying that stress kills. She talked about how Caleb and Bridget never really got along, saying, I don't want to make assumptions that he beat the hell out of her and she died.
I mean, it sounds like that's exactly what she's doing.
Let's call it what it is, right?
But I mean, the surveillance and everything else, did the timestamps match up?
We're going to talk about that in a minute.
I mean, that's what I want to know.
Well, I can tell you right now, there was a big gap.
Yeah.
So the investigation into Bridget's death lasted a whopping 2 weeks. They couldn't prove any foul play, so all the detectives were assigned to new cases and life moved on. Caleb started a new job, got a new girlfriend, and he was keeping his nose clean. Halfway through 2013, Caleb agreed to a temporary agreement where Melissa could see the kids a couple of days a week. And the court gave this a couple months to see how it would go. On August 22nd of 2013, Caleb coached his daughter's softball game, and Melissa and Chris were there with their other millions of children. After the game, Caleb went home alone. He had a drink and called his girlfriend before going to bed around 11 p.m. The next day, he didn't show up to work. So around midday, a coworker came to check on him. Caleb's housekeeper answered the door. She had been there working for a couple of hours downstairs, but hadn't seen Caleb. The two go upstairs to check on him and find him in bed with the blanket up to his chin. He had his eye mask on. Now, because he was a light sleeper, so he slept with an eye mask and with his fan on to drown out noise. But when they tried to wake him up, they realized that he was ice cold.
I mean, please tell me that the cops investigated this time.
Well, they had no choice this time.
Good Lord.
Because he had been beaten and strangled. So there was no getting around it. And there was a broken shelving unit next to the bed. Caleb's knuckles were swollen, showing that he had put up a fight. There was skin under his fingernails.
Good.
And the autopsy showed his hyoid bone had been broken and there was damage to the cartilage of his voice box. He also died the day before that temporary custody arrangement was set to end. So back to Melissa they go. She says that she saw Caleb the night before at the softball game, and then her and Chris took the kids to eat pita breads and they went home and went to bed. The police put them under surveillance. They dressed like garbage disposal workers and get their trash. Inside was a plastic bag with a pair of new black and white running shoes in them. Now, brand new shoes in the trash is a red flag. They find out that this brand of shoe is only sold at Walmart. So they pull the surveillance at the Walmart closest to where Melissa and Chris live. And even though neither of them mentioned that they had stopped at Walmart on the way home that night, you see Chris on surveillance going in, carrying the shoes to the front and buying them. It was the only size 12 black and white running shoe of that brand that had been sold there in the last 2 months. Also in the trash was a pair of black gloves that, when tested, showed blood from both Caleb and Chris. Now, Chris, while out and about one day, threw away a coffee cup and they snagged that too. They tested the DNA with what was found under Caleb's fingernails.
And it's almost like the Go 4.
Yeah.
Where they followed him
the
around.
Rex Heuermann.
Yeah, and they got the pizza box and they got this. And
Yep.
And it was Chris?
It was Chris's DNA under Caleb's fingernails.
Yeah, could have figured that. Yeah.
Now, 2 weeks after Caleb's death, Melissa filed for sole custody of the kids and moved to Nova Scotia. She went back to New Scotland. But police bugged their house. After 5 months of waiting, finally, Melissa says, "You have to realize that the underlying fact of the matter is that you killed Caleb." And Chris says, "I know." So they get a search warrant and they end up with their laptop where they see those wonderful things I love, those Google searches. It seems that in the months leading up to Bridget's death, someone Googled, how long does it take to die from choking? How long does it take for a person being strangled to pass out? And if a grandparent has legal custody and they die, which one of the parents gets the kids? This is why I love Google searches.
How fucking dumb.
Let's just, draw a map. They're just drawing a map.
Oh my gosh.
Now, just before Caleb's death, there was a Google search for easy ways to kill and get away with it. I love dumb people. So on Tuesday, January 28th of 2014, 36-year-old Chris and 33-year-old Melissa were arrested. They were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for Bridget and Caleb. In a 13-hour interview with police, Chris confessed. He said he didn't kill Bill. He was the nicest one in the family. But they were an awful family who treated the kids like shit. So one day, he knocked on Bridget's door. She opened it and he pretended to have a letter for the kids. She refused the letter, so he forced his way inside. He hit her a couple of times and then squeezed her neck until she stopped breathing. He did cry when he was giving his confession on this one, saying that he never meant for the 8-year-old to find her. He figured Caleb would find her.
Caleb was at work.
Yeah.
And he had to know that the kids would get out of school before Caleb got off work.
You would think, yeah. But I don't think logic is a strong suit for people like this.
So basically, Bill's death is just chalked up to natural.
We'll get back to that.
Okay.
Then he says he snuck out of the house in the middle of the night and went to Caleb's. He got into the house and went to Caleb's bedroom and hit him in the chest. So Caleb's laying there asleep and he just bam, hits him in the chest. Caleb sprung up and they struggled. He threw Caleb into that shelving unit that was busted, and Caleb tried to bribe him with money, but Chris says he never spoke to him. He knocked Caleb to the ground and choked him. So then he would have had to put him back into the bed, put his eye mask back on, and pull the covers up. I just wanted to throw that out there. He says Melissa didn't know anything until after. He also says that he hoped the jury would take his confession and the fact that he had kids into consideration at sentencing.
Okay, buddy.
Yeah, let's give you some compassion. Melissa and Chris had to be transported back home. So a few days later at Halifax Airport, they put the two in the same room. And you know how they like to bug places. So on the audio, you hear Chris whisper to Melissa, asking what she told them. She says, nothing. And he says, okay, because I'm taking the rap for it, to give you a lesser charge, to give you accessory after the fact.
Wow.
Heavy sigh.
What a jackass.
He's like, hey.
Well, I mean, either way, you know what? They fucking deserve whatever the fuck they get.
Well, the fact that he's like, hey, I'm going to take the rap for it, so you get lesser charges. That's saying that she had a hand in it.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
Dumbass.
I figured I figured they both had fucking hands in it.
Well, I mean. So 2 years later, because you know how the system works, an autopsy review was done in Bill's case. He had been cremated, so that's all they could do at this point. His death was changed from natural to unknown. And this led to Chris being charged with second-degree murder for Bill's death. Now, Chris and Melissa's joint trial was in November of 2017. Prosecution pushed that the motive was not just custody, but that they thought they would get millions from the Harrison estate, with the two kids being the remaining heirs and all. And Chris flipped his story by the time he got to court, now saying that he didn't kill Bridget, and he only killed Caleb on accident. He had only meant to hurt him. He only confessed previously to protect Melissa. Now, he would be found not guilty for Bill. There just wasn't enough evidence to show that he was actually murdered. But he was found guilty for Bridget and Caleb. Melissa was also found guilty for Caleb's murder. While she wasn't actually there, it was her plan. And the jury couldn't reach a verdict for her in the Bridget case, so she ended up only being charged with Caleb's. And they were both given life sentences with the possibility of parole after 25 years. In 2020, there was a police review about the ball being dropped in Bridget's case. The review found nothing, of course, but later, 2 officers did admit to neglect in her case.
No shit.
Right.
If they had done something, if they'd done some digging into Chris, maybe his alibi, they might have saved Caleb's life.
Yeah, just like you said, there was a big gap of unaccounted time when he was running errands where they couldn't see him on any surveillance. So saying that, I was out running errands, but then you can't find him out running errands? Duh.
Just bad police work.
I mean, did they talk to the neighbors to see if they saw anything? He came straight to her front damn door in the middle of the day. Did they check where his phone pinged? There was things that could have been done. And that's where we are on this one. Melissa and Chris did get a divorce. Melissa married a fellow inmate at her women's institution.
Oh, God.
Chris had a singles ad on Canadian Inmates Connect. That's a real thing. And if you're wondering, yes, it does show what he's in for and shows a possible release date of 2039. He says in his ad that he is just a big teddy bear. Yeah, a 2-time convicted murderous teddy bear.
Good night.
But that's where we are.
Well, that's it for this one. Glad you guys stopped in to listen.
Yeah, thanks
and
for
don't
being
forget
here.
that if you guys want to help us out with the pod,
Contribute.
if you want to contribute, no pressure, nothing like that, but Cash App is $murder WTM. So till next time, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends as always.
Bye.